Hey guys, I'm here with George Howard. He is a member of the Comet Research Group. He's an independent researcher. He has the Cosmic Tusk, so he's a writer. He's done a lot of field work. He's an awesome catastrophist person. So, hello, George. Welcome aboard.
Hey, Nikki, it's good to be with you.
So, I we have a lot to talk about, but let's just get into some meat here. So, you're about to do this cosmic summit coming up, and
Yep,
it's really cool, and we'll talk about that. But then Graham Hancock's going to be one of your speakers, and then there's been a lot of pushback online right now about
right.
some like really spicy, horrible allegations.
Yeah,
That would be like, oh, if you basically, I mean, like it's stuff like if you believe in any alternative theories, whether Atlantis or aliens or just like if you basically question the current paradigm, you're a white
right.
supremacist. And that's kind of like you're a racist and a white supremacist. That's like being thrown out, especially on Twitter. I've seen like the last 3 weeks, even before the show came out. It's been it's been pretty crazy. So what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's not much of a surprise, unfortunately. The individual tweets will kind of be surprising sometimes, and the intense interest, I guess even that isn't surprising, but that doesn't mean that I've been looking at it all in a calm and relaxed and manner as if I predicted it or anything. But I could see it coming, and I knew a long time ago that Netflix was coming out. We can talk about some of that. And as soon as I saw it go to the top 10, you knew it was going to set people off, right? That you had to put it down. And the accusations of racism, they're not surprising because that's been floating out there with Graham for years. They put out an issue of, I think it's the Central Archaeological Journal. I forget the exact name, but in 2019, they put out an entire issue. I don't think any discipline has ever done such a thing where they devoted an entire issue of their central publication to one person who was not even a part of their discipline and doesn't claim to be, and that was Graham Hancock.
Hmm.
And it was run through, and this is in print, with suggestions that his theories had some kind of racial basis to them, which is completely outrageous on a lot of levels we can discuss. I look forward to discussing. So when they started coming with this stuff on Twitter, it didn't surprise me, but there's a very effective response that I've been trying to bring to the fore and to arm people who are fans of Graham's to respond to this. Because first of all, your first response, and I've seen this, hundreds of times, I suppose, in the last couple of weeks, is what in the hell are you talking about? Where did you find this? I'm an old lefty and I oppose racism. I'm also been a Graham Hancock fan for 30 years, read everything he's ever written, and I never perceived any racism, right? I mean, how do you even get there? And just for the uninitiated, which is unfortunate, everybody's getting initiated now,
Yeah.
is that the pained idea, the thin idea, is that Graham is saying that the ancient cultures we already acknowledge and are somewhat familiar with are being treated with contempt, and that he believes it's the white man from the past who came and handed him all of the skills that remain so mysterious, and that came from white people, which is outrageous.
He even says, and like even if you watch the recent the Netflix show now, it'll say, I mean, he even says like I'm not saying that the native cultures all over the world didn't build their own stuff. I'm just saying that like they're it's almost kind of like a diffusion ism or whatever. Like they the problem for me though is they won't give specific examples
Yeah.
and really go into it. It's just like a blanket name calling. And I feel like
Well, what they say is the Nazis and certainly 19th century writers in their time did connect it to race, and they did consider it evidence that the Indians weren't worthy of respect,
yeah.
right? That surely these great mounds weren't built by these savages that we're conquering and oppressing now, right? And it was something of a justification for them. But good God, I mean, people still study electrical engineering, and you probably found some early electrical engineers that were racist or something. I mean, it doesn't there were racists all over during that time period, and they would connect anything they could to race when it was handy. Particularly in social sciences. I get electrical engineering, probably not much of a hook there, but in social sciences, it was all through it. My God, Darwin could arguably have been called a racist, but that doesn't mean you throw out the ideas of evolution. And certainly there were a lot, many social and the early genetic scientists, they're all racist, but we still work and refine their theories absent their contempt for people of color. Right. But here is where we got to turn on it. And I don't like playing this game, but it's damn if it isn't true. The contempt for ancient peoples comes from them. It comes from the mainstream and the academics who are throwing these accusations at Graham. And it comes in this form, Nikki, that many of these people, certainly any archaeologists, and some of them more than others, have spent careers studying ancient myths, right? And what do people who follow our subjects know? That worldwide, more than 350 cultures share stories of cataclysm, if not a cataclysm, right? And that they say that time and time again in various mythologized oral tradition ways that fit with their other understandings of the world, possibly. But the bottom line was Earth had a very, very bad day, unlike any other, and we barely made it through. And what do all of these academics now accusing him with a 5-part, double backflip methodology of racism? What did they tell those people if they're standing in front of them now? That your stories are not true.
Exactly.
That
That
you're
that's
ignorant.
myth. That's legend. Those are just myths.
That's legend, and those are all campfire
You don't
stories.
know your own history.
That's just you guys. You don't know your own history. You're telling campfire stories, and it's up to me to interpret that as some kind of probably convoluted justification of whatever their ideology is, which we know what it is. But that they've taken all of that old knowledge and dismissed it. That doesn't mean they can't be an expert in it and probably quote from many of those myths much more effectively than I could, right? But they don't take those people seriously. So if there's anybody, there's almost should be a term of racism doesn't quite get it because, my God, there were so many races in the past, including, is it racist to say Christians, that their story of cataclysm, it's universal. So just to dismiss them all isn't particularly racist, but it's temporal arrogance.
I agree.
It's arrogance directed towards people not in your own time from a place that is arrogantly assumes that you know more than they did, that they are stupid savages or dumb people telling campfire stories. And we are superior to them when the work of Bruce Massey and a handful of others and more in the future has gone back and looked at the correlated those stories and found that a lot of it is absolutely consistent with a cosmic cataclysm. That each of those things could have happened.
So that's this is your bread and butter. You love the Younger Dryas. So let's talk about that real quick. So that's the cataclysm. So
yeah, I'm a cataclysm guy, less of a pre-civilization person, though it interests me tremendously, and I'm fairly well versed in it.
Yeah, I'm kind of reversed, but I mean I recognize 100% that something went down, right? Like there's definitely
that's right.
Yeah. So how did you get into the catastrophe stuff?
I can make it a long story. I'll try to shorten it though. It's been a long time, Nikki. In the early 90s, it's been about 27 years. In the early 90s, a little bit longer, I got interested in Carolina bays. Okay. Right. Which remain what I call the kooky caboose of the Younger Dryas theory. Okay. But for me, it was the first car I got on. Right. And by studying that landform, which people can Google, and I don't have slides set up, but by God, it's a visual experience before it's anything. That they're 55,000. A lot of people say 500,000. They're wrong. 55 to 60,000 elliptical depressions in the ground that range from roughly 400 feet to 8, 9, 10 miles long that are so subtle that you can't even notice them, at ground level unless you really know what you're looking for, know that they're out there. And you would just think it's a roughly circular swamp. But when looked at from above, they're all oriented and aligned to some discrete points in the upper Midwest. So I became fascinated by that phenomenon, first of all, in the early 90s. And very quickly I discovered that it might be related if there were a catastrophe and something was to suddenly rock the eastern seaboard, that it might make sense that it was only 13,000 years ago, because that was a time that I soon became acquainted with called the Younger Dryas, and that the mainstream had already accepted that there was a mysterious climate crash. And that's going on about 95 or 96. And then a buddy asked me to, he went back, he had gone, we were 5, 6 years out of college, and he had gone back to clean up some classes and get his degree, and he was taking geology. And he said, "Hey, George, could you write me some notes? That stuff you're always talking about, those Carolina bays, are one of the subjects we can write a paper on. Could you write me some notes?" And I said, "Yeah, man, I'll write you some notes on that." So I banged out a 27-page paper on Carolina bays and put it up at the now long gone georgehoward.net, right? When we were playing around with things like that in the 90s. And I think it was damn near the very first thing I put up there. I was looking for something. I said, "Well, I got this paper, I'll put it on the internet." And very quickly, my name got associated with the subject. And if you Googled anything about Carolina bays, that paper was going to pop up. So then I put some other stuff up there and whatnot. By that time, I was already paying more attention to Younger Dryas, frankly. And in 2001, I got contacted by a guy named William Topping, and he was a little bit of a nutball, eccentric archaeologist in the Midwest who thought he had found evidence of a cataclysm at that time by looking at the features of the archaeological soils 13,000 years ago. And he was a very erratic fella, and I kind of humored him and whatnot in the first few emails. And then I got another email. He said, "I'm in touch with William Topping, and I'm doing some forensic research on his ideas that he tells me that you've been briefed on. And we'd like you to help, etc." But I looked down at the bottom of the email, and it was from Dr. Richard Firestone at 1 Cyclotron Drive, Berkeley, California. And I said, "Wow, this is a real scientist. This guy's no nut." And to this day, he's no nut. And what Firestone said was, we believe we found some evidence and indications that there was a catastrophe 13,000 years ago, and it could be identified in soils from that period. And they had been Googling or AltaVistine or whatever we were at the time. This was actually pre-Google. They've been using search terms about, catastrophe in the Midwest in paleo times, and they came across that paper. Right. And that's kind of interesting. They came at it from a completely different place. And he said, "We were just amazed that there was a whole body of research and argumentation throughout the 20th century. They were completely unaware of Carolina bays, where people had been claiming, and you had synthesized down in that paper, that the Carolina bays may have been created by a cataclysm in the Midwest 13,000 years ago. And we are coming out from a completely different angle, and we reached the same conclusion that there was such a catastrophe." So
Okay, so like
yeah,
real quick about so I know
yeah.
there's the black mat, and I know that you have the impact proxies, you have like the diamonds, or you have the what is it,
Nano diamonds.
the nano diamonds and the
Hmm.
spheroids, the little microspheroids, and you have
Hmm.
a lot of platinum that's found. Okay,
That's right.
so walk me through the methodology of how we age this period, because I know it's like 12,000, is it 12,800 to
Huh?
yeah, to 11,000.
11,600. Yeah.
By that 800-year period, are we talking about like give or take 800 years? Or are we talking about
That's
there was stuff
1,200 years.
that entire 800?
Yeah. Yeah. It's 1,200 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And walk you through how we find the evidence and how we date that.
Yes, like,
because
well, I
yeah,
mean, just because are you're like, how are you how yeah, what's the methodology of actually how are you getting that exact number?
yeah, to give some on that. That it's interesting. The young studying the Younger Dryas and then the Younger Dryas Impact are two different things, right? The Younger Dryas has been studied intensely for over 50 years, right? It was already accepted by the mainstream. That's one of the interesting things about it, and somewhat helpful, that it had already been identified and studied, increasingly well studied, um, that you could find evidence that 12,800 years ago, there was a tremendous climate crash. And that mystified scientists and caused a lot of investigations around the world into what is the evidence, where did it occur, was it only the northern hemisphere, et cetera, and so forth, what caused it. And one of the lead researchers in what ultimately became the Comet Research Group that grew out of that 2001 first contact with those fellows, one of our lead researchers actually helped define for the mainstream, Dr. James Kennett, who's in the National Academy of Sciences and on the Comet Research Group, published one of the first papers that gave the mainstream explanation that a lot of us have heard of, that this climate crash occurred because of a huge influx of fresh water in the northern Atlantic and it shut down the Gulf Stream. And that was a dramatic conclusion entirely accepted by the mainstream. So they had done carbon dating in soils and also particularly ice cores, right? Not carbon dating in them, but actually counting the yearly ice. And they knew that 13,000 years ago that the oxygen isotopes changed and flipped or indicated that there had been a tremendous drop in temperature and it was very, very sudden. And when they first identified the Younger Dryas, they thought that it might have taken 1,000 years for it to kick in before it got cold for another 1,200. And then they said, no, nah, it's 500 and then down to 200 and then down to a couple of years. And then, holy shit, it's a year. And even some mainstream researchers will tell you it was in June, 12,877 years ago from Lake Barbs in Germany, right? And we don't know that exact year. It bounces around, 12,800 plus or minus, somewhere within 800 to 890 years ago, before 12,000. So that was all well defined. Then how do you get to a catastrophe? And this is kind of where the hack of the Comet Research Group, particularly is led by Dr. Alan West. He contacted me in 2005 and said, I'm going to help out Firestone. And he had written a paper on it, had some flaws in it. And Alan said, I want to bring back Firestone's hypothesis. What you guys had worked on there, I've got a different approach to things, and it's obtaining field data. Remember when I said that that it's well understood that by the mainstream that there's a climate crash at that point, right?
Yeah.
One of the things they understood was that it coincided with the megafauna extinctions, and it coincided with the last occurrence of the Clovis people in North America, the first widespread, obvious indigenous culture.
Mm.
And at that time, in a grading soils that are building up and archaeologically useful because they've accumulated over time and there hasn't been erosion, when you go back to those places and you're doing paleontological and or archaeological digs, and you go down into the soils, you find 13,000 years ago mat of black material where the soil changes color, and they call it the black mat. And immediately below the black mat, at more than 80% of sites where paleo remains have been identified, and lithics and whatnot, and Clovis points, et cetera, that are in their original locations, that underneath the black mat, that is where you begin to find that material. That is where you'll start finding the Clovis points and the last mammoth bones and the last saber-toothed tiger and the last
Giant sloths.
I was just about to say the giant sloth and the glyptodon, which is an armadillo the size of a golf cart, on and on and on. More than 200 species of animals are only found beneath that black mat and never above it. And we're not saying that all of these animals were incinerated and never again the day after the shower of comet fragments, right? But that's what, and they were probably in some decline and appear to be already. But that's what did them in, ultimately. If you had not had that catastrophe that we believe came from above, they would have either persisted much longer or still be with us today.
And there's a lot, and the dying. Well, even the fact that the amount of bones that exist of these megafauna creatures is
Yeah,
telling, because like I always say this kind of thing. I think about this a lot, where it's like if a cow dies in a random field and
yeah,
nobody does anything today, you're gonna have vultures and
yeah.
every coyotes, and everybody's mama's dog is going to come and take that thing apart, and in 2 years from now you might be able to find a bone fragment. Like
Right.
it's we have so many kind of full skeletons of the megafauna creatures. So
That's right.
like that in and of itself speaks to me of like something that kind of mass buried them.
That's right. And they were, they don't ever occur above that black mat, right? Something happened very suddenly. Or if at all, that's a kind of a universal statement. Let's say at Murray Springs, they certainly don't. At some of the type sites, Blackwater Draw, they don't. That doesn't mean that mammoths existed till 4,000 years ago. They were contemporaneous with the pyramids, at least the ones on Wrangel Island in
Right.
Siberia. Yeah, but the Pleistocene ended, and remember that again, this is mainstream. The mainstream defined these things. They said that the world changed at that time. That's where they put the break between the last geological age and our own, between the Pleistocene and the Holocene. And that's also where humans begin to change their ways and go from plucking pears to pulling plows, right? That right after that, you see the emergence of agriculture. So that's why we say with absolutely zero humility that this event was arguably the most important thing in human history, not to mention um, biological and faunal history.
Okay, so walk us through why
Yeah.
I'm a catastrophe person for sure,
Mhm.
but like I'm kind of like the black mat for me. Okay, in my mind's eye, the reason why the impact thing isn't as convincing to me as, say, a solar flash, or I'm kind of more solar flash camp. And for
Yep.
me, it is that I feel like there's the black mat is consistent everywhere. And or I also think about like maybe there really was like super volcanoes that went off and that's what buried things with ash or something. And then I also think about, okay, so
Mhm.
walk me through George Howard's view of what happened on the day that did all this. Like, are you thinking that it's just like a nuke war of comets? Like, how does it
Yeah,
work?
or fragments of them. And that's what people need to kind of wrap their brain around what we're talking about. And my God, some of our critics, and they had to know better. But one of the most persistent, Mark Boslow, wrote a whole thing and said, well, you couldn't have obviously, a 60-mile wide comet come into the atmosphere, fragment, and shower the Earth. That's not what we're talking about, and haven't been from the very beginning of these papers. What we did was integrated the hypothesis and what we were finding on the ground with an existing hypothesis that had a hell of a lot of relevance. Um, First postulated by Dr. Napier and Dr. Clue, right, back in really the 1970s. And what they said is they found evidence that there was a fragmenting comet, that a comet entered the solar system roughly 20,000 years ago and began to fragment and go through hierarchical disintegration. Big pieces turn into smaller pieces, et cetera, and so forth, right? And all that strings out into a long orbital tail. And it would have been defined and quite a bit chunkier there in those early few thousand years. And then, just as we do twice a year today, in late June, early July, and in late October, early November, which is very significant and worth discussing, we pass through that comet tail. We call it a meteor shower now. But every meteor shower is ultimately the pieces of a disintegrating comet. At times, and particularly on that day 13,000 years ago, we hit a chunky part of it where the fragments were still large enough to cause havoc on Earth. Anything, the shooting stars that you see are, pieces of sand, essentially.
Mhm.
If you go and get a 20 or 30 to 40 meter thing, it's going to look like the impact at Chelyabinsk in 2013. Not the impact, but the that's my point, the airburst, if you will,
Right.
where you have a tremendous concussive explosion in the upper atmosphere as it comes in. If you go up one more class where you're talking 150 meters large, they still aren't necessarily going to hit the ground because it's a comet, right? Maybe an iron asteroid would, and probably some pieces did hit the ground, and they probably made craters or at least, destabilize the ice sheet and shatter the northern ice sheet at that time. But the vast majority of them would have exploded in the atmosphere like nuclear bombs and had all the effects of a nuclear bomb absent the radiation. So I think you said that a moment ago, made kind of a reference to nuclear, that it would have been like a horrific intercontinental nuclear ballistic exchange where thousands and thousands of explosions happen in the atmosphere over a very short period. And the idea being that that is what caused the ice sheet to destabilize and drain itself both into the Arctic, as we've come to understand it, but also into the North Atlantic. And indeed, then you can pick up with the mainstream. Then we're right along with them. That's when then it shuts the Gulf Stream down and changes climate. But they stop with that. They stop with, well, just somehow the ice sheet let go and plunged all this fresh water into the North Atlantic. And all we're saying is, hey, we find evidence through, as you mentioned, the nanodiamonds and the spherules and the changed geochemistry that's only explicable through a comet. And you bring up the solar flare hypothesis. I'm not going to dismiss that entirely, but the people, and I get it a lot. What about a solar flare? What about a solar flare? You see it a lot on social media, and that's fine. People are running down the right things. They're thinking the right way. They're thinking about catastrophe. But that isn't, we've taken the evidence for the comet and the evidence from Klube and Napier and the physical forensic evidence, and that points towards a comet.
Yeah, so I
It
guess
points towards impacts, and all of that's been published.
okay.
So if we're going to run with there was a catastrophe, for now, until someone comes up with one serious published peer-reviewed major journal paper providing evidence that it was, a solar flare, we need to kind of stick with what, our best evidence, right? There's a vast body of knowledge now in support of a fragmented comet, and there's internet speculation and Paul Lavalette and Robert Schoch who say it was the sun going wild.
Yeah.
That said, I fear solar flares much more personally than I do comet impacts.
Yeah, Carrington event kind of thing. That would
Absolutely. There's just nothing more horrifying for a fragile, technical civilization like our own than exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't even have to be one that would destabilize the ice sheet, which I would find, again, a little difficult from the sun.
yeah,
There's a
I mean,
lot, but I wouldn't rule it entirely out. And there's some people, and I think I need to run it down sometimes. There are even some very, very knowledgeable people that say they could have coincided.
yeah,
But I don't really quite get the astronomy on that.
have you guys like what do you guys think about tektites? Like where does that come in? I mean, I know that a lot of the tektites, like the strewn fields, are supposedly 60,000 years old instead of 10,000 years old or whatever. But I mean, like I'm a huge tektite collector. I have every tektite that exists, like whether it's or Siberian glass or Australianite or Darwin glass or whatever it is. Like there's Columbianite. There's okay, so they're supposedly supposed to be. This is for I know you know this, but I'm just telling people who don't know what they are. So tektites are the impact evidence of if a comet hits, it's supposedly the sand goes up in the air and it melts and back down. It becomes glass. It's like cosmic, or it's a meteor impact caused glass. Like that was the theory of what it is. Although it doesn't, like the strewn fields are huge, and that doesn't always make sense to me because some of them are even found in the ocean, a lot in the Indonesian Ocean. But if you look at how big some of the tektite strewn fields are, that I think I don't know how they come up with the dating of how old these things are. I would think that would go into a giant, cosmic event situation.
Yeah. Well, tektites are one of the absolute greatest mysteries in science. And I've got a Moong Nong, one of those Vietnamese or visit Thailand. I've got one of those, a nice chunk of that, and I've got some Libyan desert glass.
Yeah, I love my Libyan.
And when we talk about the metallic and silicate microspherules that we find, at that time, 13,000 years ago with the Younger Dryas event, those are technically tektites as well, right? But that would have been a lot of tektites are, again, and it's a great mystery, and I'm no expert, but purported for good reason to be the actual result of an impact casting Earth material into the upper atmosphere. Some of it actually would have escaped. It's a whole other story. And then it falls back down as a frozen rain that was liquid there for a little while, and that creates what you're collecting as tektites.
Yeah, little tiny spheroid that they had little tiny bubbles inside that captured in the glass, and that's how come they hypothesized that that's what formed as it was coming back down.
That's right. That's right. And you see the exact same features in the same morphology in the microscopically small spherules that we find. But what's happening in our event is the vast, vast majority, virtually everything we found, is microscopic. So that suggests what happened was, again, not a crater producing event that cast the material for the Younger Dryas event up, and then it falls back down in chunks of solidified material, but rather the hellacious plumes of superheated cosmic plasma, basically, that are cast on the ground when one of these medium-sized objects that doesn't create a crater, but comes in when that hot hell of a plume hits the ground, it kicks up the Earth itself, not as gigantic molten pieces like you would in a crater forming event, but more of a vapor of material, and then that falls as microscopic material. So it's kind of all of a piece, right? But tektites are a complete mystery.
Yeah, I mean, it's because a lot of times there isn't a large impact crater associated with them, which is like a problem.
And of course, you've probably come across the work of Mike Davies, who started with the Carolina Bays and then found his way with Thomas Harris all the way to the Australasian tektites. And he's saying all of that's coming from Saginaw Bay. The Carolina Bay material, some of it made it
as far
all the
as
way around, right? And I can send you some stuff on that, but it's very interesting. So they're actually trying to tie that. Now they believe that the Bay forming event was 700,000 years ago. So they actually depart from connecting the bays from the Younger Dryas, but they managed to connect them with the Australasian tektites. So it's kind of funny when you get in this, and it happens in any small field. And here we are all agreeing on the big picture stuff, but then you start to differentiate about the details, and then those sides start fighting, right? You get Antonio Zamora, Chris Cottrell, these are all Carolina Bay enthusiasts, God bless them, and Michael Davies going at each other on how the bays were created. And sometimes we forget now the importance, and I think those guys are actually pretty respectful of each other. And they do recognize that the important thing is the Carolina Bays are a mystery that needs to be solved. Right.
So with Carolina Bays, is it like so I guess like the kind of like visual I was getting was that it was underneath a sheet of ice and then got like plummeted, and then like it was almost like the reason why they aren't like very distinctive craters is because they are almost like they were hit with ice on them first, and then it was almost like pushed down. Like how do you
yeah, and again, there's bays would continue to be not a complete mystery, but a overwhelmingly mysterious. And Antonio Zamora, who does a lot of work on YouTube, is absolutely tireless.
yeah,
In
I
the
watched that
research.
guy's videos.
Yeah, what he hypothesizes, and he does believe it's the Younger Dryas event, is that at least one large chunk made it all the way down, right? Did not blow up entirely in the atmosphere, slammed into the ice sheet around Michigan, or in Michigan, modern day Michigan.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
Like Great Lakes.
yeah, in the Great Lakes and created what today is Saginaw Bay, that would have been the footprint under the ice of that impact, and that it cast those hypersonic icebergs
Mm.
into the upper atmosphere. They arced back down, and just prior to them coming down, he does some pretty good math on this, and I hadn't double checked it all, but Tony seems to be reliable, and as crazy as it sounds to certainly mainstream people, he's got a sequence of events, and he says that the earthquake would have arrived first if you had such a tremendous event 900 miles from North Carolina, where the biggest concentration of bays are, and where I live. Um, it would have shook the coastal plain, the uh, shallow aquifer, literally damn near, surface water sands of the Atlantic coastal plain. When you shake that kind of surface environment violently, it liquefies the sand, right? It turns into kind of what we call quicksand, if you will. And if you go look at sand liquefaction, earthquake liquefaction on the internet, you'll see all sorts of pictures from around the world where you'll see, an apartment building in Japan that's sunk down 3 floors, or a car that's been completely sucked into the ground because it turned into a liquid state briefly because it was shook so violently.
Mm.
So he says that happened on the coastal plain of North America, and then those large chunks of ice came in, slammed into that soup. That creates the rims. That creates a shallow depression because it kicks it all out first, and then it all falls back in like a viscous goo. And he's done some scaled down experiments that end up looking just like Carolina Bays, where you take a piece of ice and shoot it at high speed into liquefied substrate, just like that would have been, and that's exactly what happens. It kicks it out, lays the whatever lays out what now appear to be the rims, and then what would happen? The ice would melt, and then you're left nothing but with the secondary crater.
So America got it bad, man.
Oh yeah, it was a bad day.
It really was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have done some digging at I can't say that right.
Tall Mom. Yeah.
Telhabam in Jordan. There's some speculation that that's Sodom or whatever, like of Sodom and Gomorrah that was killed by like fire, braming, whatever. So
Yeah.
it's so what are you finding correlations in terms of like, okay, I know that wasn't Younger Dryas related, but it
Right.
was like more recently, but it still is sort of remnants of a catastrophe happened at the place.
That's right. And it gets back to the airburst, that probably the things that affected civilization over time, that the big crater forming events do happen on the time scales that geologists generally think about. That we shouldn't experience these in 300,000 years of Homo sapiens because they only happen every 3 million years or so, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. But you're going to encounter those atmospheric explosions and air bursts much more frequently because there's a hell of a lot more medium-sized stuff than big stuff, and you're going to experience the meteor showers regularly because there's another,
Go through it twice a year, right? So
yeah, there's another order of magnitude greater little stuff, and that my belief is, and other catastrophes of my vein believe, that we've been repeatedly traumatized by airburst events during the human experience. And the Tal al-Amam dig was the Comet Research Group, but one of our rare departures from the Younger Dryas event. And that's kind of came from me being contacted by a wonderful old catastrophist, Philip Clapham, in England. And I've never met Philip, but I just picture him as the tweed coat guy with the leather elbow patches, maybe with a pipe. And he's every bit 80 now, and he's an old Velikovskian, right? So he was the original 20th century catastrophist that kept the flame alive, that now that we have burning so brightly on Ancient Apocalypse, there have always been people who have said this going back to Plato. And during the mid 20th century, they were called Velikovsky because Emanuel Velikovsky kind of led that thing. He was wrong about a lot, but just like all of us, he was right about the central features. And then it came from above. So Philip contacted me. He says, George, I'm in touch with an archaeological dig in Jordan. I mean, it sounds like something out of a damn movie, right?
Right.
I'm in touch with an archaeological dig, a biblical dig it is, but they're responsible biblical people. And that they're digging in Jordan and they think they've found Sodom. They've been working on the dig for, I think at that time, 13 years. And they have a burn layer a couple of meters down in their soils that dates back to the early Middle Bronze Age, which would have been roughly appropriate for biblical times. And they had first dug the site because they are biblical archaeologists, and he had done the geography of the Bible, suggested to Dr. Collins, who's a wonderful person who'll be speaking at the Cosmic Summit 2023. And I think people will really enjoy hearing from him. And that Collins had reverse engineered the geography of the Bible, and he does a great job explaining that on the internet. And if you go and search Stephen Collins and Kalalamam or Sodom, it's actually, you don't have to know how to spell that. Steve Collins and Sodom, you can see his whole explanation of how he got to dig at this particular atoll, but he had actually kind of reverse engineered it. He said it needs to be probably on the the east bank of the Jordan, right? Not the west. And it would be in those collections of atolls over there. So he started investigating them systematically, surface investigations, and came across a particularly enormous one. And for the first time in many years, he was able to collect on it, or anybody was, because it had been a gun emplacement by the Jordanian army through most of the 20th century. And that they had taken the mines out. It had been mined. So you don't get a whole lot of archaeology around landmines for good reasons, but they had cleared them all out. So it's kind of interesting when you're digging there that they're so sure they're all gone. I'm like, are y'all sure? Because I did a lot of walking around that thing. But they cleared them out, so it was available for archaeology, and he began a dig there. And he gets down to a particular layer at a relatively appropriate time, and you find the breath of hell. It's all been heated to 2,500 and 3,000 degrees centigrade, enough to melt a car instantly, right? And the pottery on one side, they'll find fragments of pottery that are melted and bubbled and have indications of super high heating far beyond anything that would be experienced in the kiln. And you find extraordinary levels of platinum again that are inexplicable otherwise. And when Clapham got in touch with me, he said, they hadn't found all that stuff yet. They just knew they had a burn layer. He said, could you contact your research team? They have the forensic skills necessary to properly investigate and categorize the burn layer and see whether it really is from space, right? Because these guys are very good on the pottery side. And I'm telling you, if anybody has their questions about the integrity of biblical archaeologists, with the basic tools of archaeology, they need to spend some time reading up on Collins, because there is no question he's a great archaeologist while at the same time being a man of faith, right? They follow regular protocols, but they don't have any transmission electron microscopes and spectrometers and all of that kind of stuff to characterize that material. Could your people assist? Then I contacted the Comet Research Group kind of leadership and said, hey, I've got this contact. There's a dig over there. They need some help, and we do not stray much at all. This is the single largest departure, one other up in Alaska, where they looked into a different time period, and they actually gave it careful consideration, got back to me and said, you know what, we're going to go for it. We will help. And you go get your ass over there, Howard, and collect some stuff and send it back. And I'm like, holy shit. So I went over there, and it was right when ISIS was booming. And you're about 70, 80 miles from the Syrian border. They had just burned the Jordanian pilot in the cage. And I'm like, oh man, this is the worst time to go to the Middle East. ISIS is actually, they're talking about invasions from these ghoulish, terrorists, into Jordan. But yeah, I'll go over there. I got over there. Of course, none of the dig people were worried, right, about this stuff. And I was here all scaredy cat. And I'll get to where we brought some real scientists over there. But I went over there kind of check things out, get to know them, and maybe collect some samples, which I did, mail back boxes and boxes of samples. And but I remember just for a little funny aside, I asked one of the people on the bus one day because we get on the bus at the same time every morning, and I'm on Jordan, which does have terrorist incidents. And I said, "Gosh, it just don't it ever worry y'all that somebody could go by on a motorcycle and throw a bomb under this thing or anything like that?" And lady turns around, sweet lady, and says, "Oh no, the Lord will protect us." And I was like, "Oh no, that's why nobody's worried. Nobody in their mind would be over here
Oh,
unless somehow certain that, they had some extra help from above, So yeah, the Lord would protect us in there. So we had an interesting first year. I had a great time joining them. I got to spend a lot of time on my hands and knees like everybody else, but I also got to kind of roam around and look for rocks, if you will, and try to, go down in the wadis and see whether there's any indication of a more recent phenomena like the black mat. And then, but the next year I came back with a wonderful archaeologist from North Carolina, PhD, um, and Dr. Malcolm LeCompte, uh, and Clay Swindell, being a North Carolina archaeologist, and then a MD, very, very smart man, Tim Whitmer. So all of them credentialed people. And then we collected samples, more professionally, more extensively. And they went back one following year. So we collected all this stuff up, sent it back to the States, distributed amongst laboratories to look at its, features that weren't easily identified without very, very expensive equipment. And it took them 6 years to write the paper, the scientific paper. I mean, that's a lot of work, and it is a deep and detailed forensic study of this site. I mean, it was not treetop stuff. And they published it. We published it. I was on the paper. We published it last September. And Nikki, it's the #1 downloaded scientific paper on Earth. It's had 555,000 downloads.
woo, woo.
A year. Yeah, which goes to show how much interest there is out in this stuff. And I imagine half of those are credentialed scientists, just like, why in the hell are they talking about the Bible and nature? Went on Nature Publishing. And then probably the rest of them, or portions of the rest would be fundamentalists and believers that want to see something published in a major journal that supports their beliefs, and then catastrophists, people like ourselves that are interested in these subjects in general. It's attracted the critics that went absolutely apeshit and tried to get it retracted. Came up with some very, very thin criticisms, did not address the central evidence at all. Nature refused to retract it, to their great credit. I'm going on too long, but it's been an interesting saga. And then it made it as the final Jeopardy question a couple of months ago.
Oh, really?
And we thought that was pretty cool, man. It was like the end of Jeopardy, and the host goes, "Here's a category we've never had on Jeopardy: science and the Bible." And they said, a research team in 2021 published a scientific paper providing evidence for a cataclysmic impact from space that created this city. Ding dong, mentioned in the Bible. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. And the guy wins it by Sodom.
Wow. Okay,
So
that's
you kind of knew you'd taken it from going out there in the field with the, ISIS bearing down on you. Is this really worth it? Till he gets to Final Jeopardy, it was quite satisfying.
You're like, answer is yes. But see, that I wonder if
I'm sorry to go on so long here.
That's great. That was an awesome
Okay.
story. I wonder, I mean, like when I was in Egypt, like Elephantine Island, or
Yeah.
there's so many other ones that you're kind of going like, yeah, it looked like, or what is that other one, like somewhere in Memphis, or there's a couple of Thanis. Yeah, there's a couple of that it looks like literally like a nuke went off. So you're kind of going,
gotta wonder.
Look at this stuff a little bit.
You gotta wonder. And at the Cosmic Summit, 2023, June 16th through 18th, Asheville, North Carolina, Cosmic Summit 2023.com. We're gonna have Russ of the Snake Brothers, the brothers of the serpent.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Russ and Kyle. that Russ Allen is going to give a presentation. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, and y'all are very intuitive, and actually more than intuitive. You've seen it yourself. You were talking about the unfinished nature of some of these sites where you're like, what the hell happened? They went to so much trouble and then it just stops. Why would you drop your tools in the middle of such a Herculean effort? What are the odds of having to been at that point and then just stop? And I look forward to seeing Russ. Apparently, I have not seen it. Gives a great presentation called Unfinished, right?
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And that's going to be his hour and some change at the conference, is to address that very thing. Why were these places? And I heard your podcast where you're talking about, it's weird. They'll be both unfinished and chaotic. They'll be unfinished and destroyed.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's like drop your tools and then a catastrophe happened, or does a catastrophe happen while you got your tools up, or you were able to, engage in this megalithic, inexplicably megalithic engineering and architecture, and then you were invaded, taken over right at the moment.
It's such a mystery. I mean, it really is like
Yeah,
trying to figure out like, a puzzle piece or a giant puzzle with
it
four
is.
pieces, but I'm really looking at a lot of the like hallmarks that are found like globally in all different places, but then it's really hard to sift through because there's damage holes and you're wondering like, well, what period were these? Like, it's almost like there's an intentional destroying of a lot of these sites too.
Yeah.
So you're wondering where that comes into play
And
versus.
weirdly destroyed. I heard y'all talking about the scoop marks out of the side of the boxes in the Serapeum. You're like, how the hell do you even make that kind of damage?
And there's a lot of like another big damage hole that's kind of is on jointing on a lot of
Yeah.
megalithic stones, like where the T of the joint
Yeah.
starts. It looks like it imploded from the inside out. It's like I don't know if
It's so
some other
bizarre, isn't it?
culture came in and tried to take stuff out of, if there was like some sort. I don't we were like there's so many really weird anomalies, but the most anomalous about it is that they're so pervasive globally.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. Well, just
bizarre.
like the nubs and things like that.
Oh
You've had a
yeah,
lot
the
of good work on the
nubs.
nubs.
The nubs are like
Um,
my obsession. I love my nubs.
yeah, yeah. Somebody's got to get to the bottom of that. But I'm sure you'd agree that a trip to Egypt, particularly looking at things with our perspective, or damn near anybody's perspective, but going and deliberately looking at these things and having good guides that show it all to you, you don't really learn anything. You just come back with a lot better
A
questions.
lot of questions. But that's a
Yeah,
thing.
you
I don't
learn
actually
more
know.
questions.
I don't know
Yeah,
how you go there or like to Peru or like
yeah,
these places, or even like when I went to Tikal, I came back going like,
yeah.
this place is like bigger than New York City. Like, why is this? I mean, Sacsayhuama was the first place I went to where I just like cried because I was like, we don't talk about this enough. We don't know what's going
Yeah,
on. Like this isn't work.
yeah, yeah,
But I mean,
yeah.
I don't know how you can go to Egypt and then come back and be like, it is what they say it is. Everything is
I
as.
don't know. Well, for instance,
Yeah.
you can't go see the Assyrian or Siron and the Valley Temple and come away thinking anything but the same people built
Oh
it,
yeah.
and that it's different from every other thing. You'll go see all this other stuff, and then you see those two sites, and you're like, huh, the same people who built that place built that other place by the Sphinx.
Yep.
No question in my mind. And the mainstream absolutely disputes that, right? And they're just kind of genetically different from all the other architecture too.
Yeah, they really, and for me, like, they look very similar to Peru. And then
Yeah,
you can't say that because that's like,
yeah. In the Osirian, it looks genetically different from its associated temple that they say they were contemporaneous. And
right.
you're like, nobody built that and this at the same time. It's like building a modernist house on the back of a colonial or something. I mean, just
Exactly.
nobody does that architecturally, particularly when you're such precise, beautiful, elegant architects. You
Well,
know,
I really do encourage people some point in your life, go somewhere. So like with like these crazy ruins, just you don't have to go to every place, but go to a couple of them because I mean that will I don't think you can replace the hearing about it on a podcast or researching it with the seeing some of these things in person and the scale. Like the
yeah.
scale is just woo.
Well, I'm getting ready to begin something of a semi-retirement on its way to retirement, and I'm going to pick up my travel schedule like never before. I've obviously
Good.
done a couple of cool things, but not nearly as much as a lot of you guys have, including yourself. And I've still yet to see this channeled scab lambs, and I want to go out there with my buddy Randall Carlson. Got something else to say about him in a second. And I'm going to go. I'm already talking to Ben. He hadn't set a date yet, but I'm going to go with Ben Van Kurik of Uncharted X. We're going to go to Turkey next spring and
Oh,
go see some
I'm
epic
looking
happy.
to go into Turkey. I was looking, I mean, I've been looking at a couple of tours, so
Yeah.
um Turkey is like really big on my mind.
Oh, NEXT and Johanna are going to have a great tour too. You
Yeah,
know,
Hugh Newman has one I'm looking into,
yeah,
and Andrew Collins. There, that one's, I don't know, I think like in May or something. But there's a
yeah,
couple of different options that I've been looking at. But Turkey is on my radar. Like 2023 in Turkey, I
yeah,
have a date with it somehow. But yeah,
yeah.
so
Well, I tell you, these are good times, Nikki, for people who think like we did, and we can't let the bastards get us down. Okay,
yeah. I mean,
and
there's,
I
they
if we think they got us down, it ain't nearly as bad a week as they're having right now. With Graham hitting the top 10 Netflix and another just blowout Joe Rogan. Randall Carlson is right now halfway through his interview with Tucker Carlson in Sarasota, Florida.
oh wow.
An hour-long interview. Now that'll go on Fox Nation on their streaming, but they boil that down to one that'll go on to Tucker Carlson itself. And he might not be everybody's political cup of tea, but he did a good job on UFOs. Bringing mainstream attention to that, mainstream news attention, and he stuck with it. And it's funny, he doesn't do that. He doesn't do another kooky subject, if you will, other than that. But somehow our crazy catastrophe has caught his eye, and that many more people. So you add all this up, you've got a top 10 Netflix. Hell, it was number 2 for most of the week last week.
It's
I've been able
number
to climb
one or
back in.
something right now on IMDb.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it ain't going nowhere. And you're gonna have a season 2. Um, so you got a top 10 Netflix, which is just unbelievable. And will pay dividends for years with global understanding. And then you've got the #1 interview program podcast in the world with Rogan, who's been such a tremendous supporter in getting the word out and increasing global knowledge on our subjects, which are so niche or used to be. And now you've got the #1 cable news program in the United States featuring it sometime in the next few days. You can't have a better, you literally cannot have a better 2 weeks than that.
Yeah.
That's as much attention as can possibly be brought to something that isn't the catastrophe itself occurring today.
Which is also a good segue into, tell us why the Cosmic Summit is badass.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. We don't know yet. It ain't happened yet, so we can tell nothing about the history of it. But it's looking to be
it's
badass.
set up to be pretty badass.
Yes, it was set up to be pretty badass. And I went out to a conference in Sedona, Arizona, and presented out at Robert Dakota's gathering last spring. And I was like, this is magical. The audience is its own best entertainment at these things, first of all. I mean, there were some very interesting people there. I mean, really cool people. And I'm a pretty conservative guy. I'm out there in Crystal Country and whatnot. And it wasn't all flakes. There were plenty of flakes. But I sat down the first day. I was a presenter, but, also an audience person. And I sat down the first day, and to my left was a young girl with blue hair and a nose ring, and that was a tattoo artist in San Diego and had driven all the way there. And to my right was a mechanical engineer that ran a Frigidaire factory in Indiana. And I said, man, when you can get, there were Republicans, Democrats, old, rich, hippies, Christians. There was everybody there. And I said, I've got to do one of these myself. I want to do an East Coast version of this. So I kind of chose an East Coast Sedona. Sedona, which is Asheville, North Carolina, which is a wonderful, enlightened, hip place of a diverse group of people. Tickets are selling very well. Already exceeded the pro forma for sales that we set for the entire event because we were being very conservative.
Wow.
The thing is in June, and we've already exceeded that 3 weeks in. So tickets are going quickly, but we got a big room and can put 1,200 people or so in it. And
there's also a way for you to watch online if you can't make it.
Absolutely, there is, Nikki. Just about to say, and we're going to live stream the whole thing. And upcoming here, when you buy the live stream, it's not apparent now, but we're going to wrap a community around buying the live stream. Okay, so that when you buy that live stream, you're also a summiteer. right? And we're going to have proprietary podcasts and web stuff, webinars. You'll get early emails about the latest science and various takes and things like that, so that we can at least make you a digital buddy, even if you can't go in person. Obviously, people they go in person, receive that too. But the live stream is very reasonably priced at $50. So if you can't make it to Asheville, we'd like to have a lot of live streamers. And if we're able to put it all together and pull this off, and it's a good and profitable conference, I'm going to go ahead and do it again and again and again. I'm going to take every penny I make from this, if I'm lucky enough to make some, and I'm going to roll it into the next one and the next one and the next one.
Good.
And we're never going to shut up. And the idea is, we're going to get you on there too. Okay. This is not going to be the same cast of characters, okay, in every version. But the idea of it was, what I saw was people getting millions of downloads. So we've got, Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, Nikkianajones, who's a tremendous, tremendous talent, right? And Jimmy Corsetti are kind of our big four. And then we've got another 12 people that are absolutely fascinating, and we're going to have to run here in a second, but anybody can see it at the website, cosmicsummit2023.com. And these people were all getting millions of downloads, as we know, and a lot of interest. But then I said, they're like a band where everybody's downloading their songs, different bands, and they're all downloading songs in this particular genre. And they hadn't had a damn concert or a festival yet.
Exactly.
It's like there's no place to go see them in the flesh, have a beer with them afterwards. It's still small enough to do all that kind of stuff. And, and it's going to be better in a band. You stand.
Well, I'm going to go. I'm going.
Oh, are you going? Okay.
Yeah.
See,
I'm going in person to Asheville.
Nikki, that is wonderful. I appreciate you buying a ticket. We're going to have a blast. And again, the audience in Sedona, and this is probably going to be a much bigger version of that. There's a lot more lead time. In Sedona, there were people like Martin from After School, who was just in the audience, and he's got 2 million damn followers. There were influencers like yourself in the audience. So the audience literally were entertainers themselves. So we're going to have all our crazy nuts in a room. We're never going to shut up, and we're going to win this battle. We're going to change this paradigm, and we're going to change the understanding of human past to the correct version. And that's one that's been occasionally racked by catastrophe.
I love it. It sounds super awesome. Okay.
I can't wait to see it.
I can't either. I'm super excited about it. So George, tell us where people can find you. And so
I started a link tree. I don't know how people if you go on my Twitter.
I've not figured out the link tree. I need to do that.
I'm trying to get into it so you don't have to kind of run through these things. But I'm on Twitter at Cosmic Tusk. And, @ Cosmic Tusk is my handle. George Howard is my name there. And then I have a website, and I've blogged on this since 2010, and it's undergoing a major renovation now. It's going to be better than ever. I'm going to roll a new one out within the next couple of weeks, but that's cosmictusk.com. Okay. And the conference has dedicated Facebook page, Instagram page, and a dedicated Twitter, which is at Cosmic Summit 23. And so there are 3 things wrapped around the conference. And then you got my blog where you can leave your email in there, right? And subscribe to that. And then my personal Twitter, which is about nothing but the stuff anyway. And then just to close, I'd like to make a pitch. There's also a Facebook group that's worth joining, and that's the Cosmic Research Group's Facebook, which is pretty darn active and has latest updates on the research and our papers and whatnot. They also have a website, cosmicresearchgroup.org. But at either of those, you can make donations to the Cosmic Research Group. And every little bit helps, like anything. And there is probably no higher gain in knowledge per donation to any kind of research organization on Earth. Every single dollar of it goes directly into that research. Ain't nobody taking any administrative fees or any of that stuff. It goes directly to paying for those platinum tests and those hours on the transmission electron microscope. And it has helped. We're raising some money through that. It's not huge dollars, but we've had some big donors come through too. So that's cosmicresearchgroup.org or the Cosmic Research Group Facebook, and both of them have places where you can donate directly to this research and the furtherance of human understanding.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, George. You're like the master connector of it all. Let's just
Ah, well, I'm in two lanes. I'm in the science lane and the woo-woo lane, and I'm driving right down the middle of
but
the road.
you also
And I'm
got the
probably
business
gonna get
head,
hit.
but you were in the business hat trying to be like, right, herd
That's right. That's right. Thanks a lot,
talking
Nikki. It's
people
good
in
to
cons.
get to know you. Yes.
I get to know
Stay
you
in touch.
too. So thank you so much for coming on, George. We'll have you on again sometime soon.
Terrific, Nikki.
Bye.